Welcome to the Chronicles of Orn, Book 1, Chosen. Whilst this story is voiced by AI, it is an original story by W.J.R. Pollard. All characters, places, and events in this story are fictional, and any resemblance to real people and events is unintentional. Prologue. Why that island? Gaius Gracchus asked. It would be easier to catch slaves anywhere else. He was a short man of advanced middle age with an expanding midriff. His black hair, streaked with grey, receded from his creased forehead. With thick black brows, dark eyes, and a long nose, his tanned features were common for Nevans. A worn leather belt cinched his knee-length red tunic at the waist. Tucked away in a dark corner, deep in conversation, he sat with a figure in a deep purple velvet robe. Their heads leaned in close, and they kept their voices low. "If the gold is good, what does it matter?" countered the man opposite Gracchus. His companion hid his identity with his hood up, hanging over his face. Shadow concealed the rest. He spoke in a manner that revealed him to be a man of high status, uncommon in this town. As Gracchus glanced around the taproom, he saw a sparse crowd. This was standard for midweek in Precipice, a northern coastal town in the Nevan Empire. The innkeeper's plump wife attended to the few regulars. Tavern wenches wearing provocative dresses fawned over the cluster of Nevan soldiers. They watched them drink and gamble over dice as their occasional cheers and laments rose above the general din. A bard strummed his lyre, singing songs of love gained and lost. These went largely unheard by patrons more interested in vice than virtue. "What about the treaty?" Gracchus asked, exasperation apparent in his hoarse, whispered voice. "I'm taking a huge risk going near that island, let alone snatching people from it. You do know what they'll do to us if we're caught. Have you ever seen someone become the dragon?" "I have. I don't wish to experience it for myself." Gracchus shuddered at the recollection. Men with their backs sliced down the middle, flayed outwards, and strung up, still alive, by the opened skin. After a brief pause, the robed man produced a small object from within his robe, passing it to Gracchus. "If that's your concern, drink this if you are captured." "What's this?" He took the delicate, blue-colored glass vial, turning it to get a better look. "Poison. Fast-acting, virtually painless." Gracchus, with his eyebrows raised, a sardonic grin spread across his face, quipped, "Virtually, you say? Well, I would presume far less painful than becoming the dragon. Is it?" He gave the robed figure a long, piercing look. "Why is it so important that I risk my ship sailing there?" "Your mission is what, where, and when. As for the why, that is my business. The money I will pay you is equally for how you perform the task as for performing the task itself. The Holder rulers have their annual gathering, and this year it's in Flodavra, the Holvalan capital. As all Holder rulers are attending, their fleets will stay close to the mainland, so they should pose no obstacle." "Easy for you to say. You haven't faced Holder ships before. They're faster, more maneuverable, and their warriors fight like demons from hell. They believe death in battle is the only way into their god's graces. On top of that, each man is a match for at least a half squad of legionaries. I mean, hell, have you ever seen a Holderman? They're bloody huge. No obstacle, he says. Peh." The disdain was clear in Gracchus' voice as he glared at him. "You will be well compensated, I assure you. 200 pieces. 20 now, the rest on completion. I want at least double, else the risk isn't worth it." "Fine. Fine. 400 pieces, then." Gracchus clicked his tongue while looking towards the ceiling. Then he looked at the robed figure through narrowed eyelids. "Make it 600, higher risk, higher fee." The man in the robe tensed, a hissing sound emerging from his hood as the man exhaled through his teeth. Then in a clipped tone he said, 400 is more than generous. It's more than you'd make in 3 years selling your used-up, half-starved subhumans. Besides, you're not the only man with a ship. I'm practically doing you a favor." "All right, fine, fine. So, 40 now, the rest when it's done, right? The robed figure continued as though Gracchus hadn't spoken. The robed man then said, "This undertaking is time-sensitive. It is imperative that you arrive during the night of Surgery Week. I will send a man to your dock with the balance of payment upon completion. Did you receive the crates I sent to your ship? And I trust your crew stowed them discreetly and securely aboard." An annoyed expression crossed Gracchus' rough features as his voice dripped with sarcasm. "Done and done. And before you ask, no, I haven't opened them, as per instructions." "Good. The contents of those crates include instructions for what to do with them once you are underway. After you have read the instructions, burn them." Gracchus' eyes narrowed to slits as he regarded the man before him, and he thought, "This is hinky. Perhaps I should quit while I'm ahead. Hells, while I still have a head. But then, 400 gold. That's enough to buy that house on the coast, and I can retire, let my first mate captain, kick back and enjoy the profits. Besides, I've risked more for copper and a pat on the back in the legions." The robed man nonchalantly reached inside his robe and produced a pouch, dropping it onto the table with a muffled thud and metallic clinking. Gracchus scooped up the pouch, emptying some of its contents into his hand, his doubts all but evaporating. Several gold coins glinted in the candlelight, and Gracchus' eyes took on a gleam all too common in men wholly seduced by coin. His gaze returned to the robed figure as he tipped the coins back into the pouch. Hefting it to gauge its weight, he looked at the robed man while holding out his other hand. "I said 40 now." Within the robe, the man's shoulders slumped as he sighed. "We had agreed on the amount prior to our meeting. So, considering I have graciously accepted your arbitrary increase, this deposit shall have to suffice. What am I supposed to give my men as an incentive to go along with this job?" "You're a clever man. Figure it out. Have a little faith, Gracchus. When I say you will be compensated, you will be compensated. I will ensure you get all that you deserve and more." Gracchus fixed him with a baleful stare for a second while stowing the pouch inside his tunic. The robed figure moved to stand, pausing halfway, and fixed Gracchus with a glare that, while he couldn't see, he certainly felt. He then said, "Make no mistake, should you think to cross me, there's no place you can go that I won't find you. Perhaps then, I shall see you, become the dragon, for myself." Gracchus winced, inclining his head in acknowledgement. The robed figure stood, turned, and exited the tavern with two plain-looking soldiers discreetly moving to follow. As the three made their way to the exit, Gracchus' eyes followed the figure's back. How he wished he could plant his sword in it. He remained seated, nursing his cup in contemplation. Then, downing the rest of his wine, he gathered himself to leave. After calling over the innkeeper's wife, he passed her some copper coins, and headed to the door before leaving himself. Outside, Gracchus turned, making his way down the mostly deserted cobblestone street, and headed toward the docks. Lining the street were stone brick buildings containing various shopfronts and businesses. The imposing buildings lining the straight, paved roads projected Nevan power in the form of ordered opulence. As he moved along the street, his mind returned to considering the myriad ways this job could go wrong. He thought, how do I trust a man who won't identify himself, and who could be so important they would have elite bodyguards? Better I had accepted, for no doubt I'd be bleeding out in an alley by now. Damn it, no help for it now. In for a copper, in for a gold. Gracchus was a competent soldier when he was a legionary all those years ago. However, he knew elite soldiers when he saw them. Those two men were Senate guards, the best in the Empire. He'd seen Senate guards once or twice before. Only the mightiest made their way into the Senate guards' ranks. Their reputation alone was enough to turn fierce men to water. He walked on as his mind continued to wander. Before he knew it, the cobblestones gave way to the wooden sleepers of the town wharves. The ships of the Nevan Empire were single-masted galleys with banks of oars wielded by galley slaves, caught or purchased and pressed into service. He walked past a couple of small merchant ships and military vessels before arriving at his ship's berth. He approached the gangplank, summoning his first mate. Vanna. A short, muscular man with a shaved head and a prominent, angry-looking scar along the left side of his pale, aged face appeared from astern. He wore a dark blue tunic and sandals. In a gruff, gravelly voice, the product of a lifetime at sea, Vanna asked, "Sir, ready the ship by morning. We leave at first light." "Aye, sir." Part 1. Chapter 1. On the island of Sofjaland's southwestern coast, the morning air blew along the shore. It bent the grass beyond the pebble beach, bringing the scent of wet rocks and the sea. The breeze passing through the pines beyond the grass produced soft rustling sounds, punctuated by the occasional forlorn cry of a seabird. Over the peaceful scene, the sun rose above the eastern horizon, sharing its warmth with the new day. Small waves rolled in, lapping at the shore. The calm surface of the water appeared glass-like, with a slight rippling as airflow, current, and tide competed to direct the water. Sitting on a log, they dragged down onto the pebble beach near the water's edge. Two young brothers held fishing poles. With lines cast in the water, the two boys kept watchful eyes over pieces of white-painted bark they were using for floats. Orn Avdlak was average-sized for a boy of his age. At 14, he hadn't yet filled out his slim, sprouting frame. With piercing, inquisitive gray eyes, he had raven-black hair reaching his shoulders, framing his youthful face. Eric was almost a year older at 15, with sparse whiskers sprouting from his face. He wore his long, sandy blonde hair with a pair of braids at the temples in imitation of their father. He had deep blue eyes on a face with a perpetual grin. Unlike his younger brother, he had a muscular frame from helping in his father's iron forge. Both boys wore garb typical of Halder villagers: tunics, dark blue pants, buckskin vests, and fur-lined, deerskin boots stitched to hardened leather soles. However, whereas Orn's tunic was sky blue, his older brother, Eric's, was burgundy. "What do you think we'll catch?" asked Orn. The boys had sat out there fishing since sunup. "Probably perch. I mean, those things are always active, and they eat anything that moves or smells." He strained as he leaned left. He struggled to stifle his laughter while he scooped air in his brother's direction. "Speaking of smells. Ugh. Damn it, Eric. I don't want to breathe your air, let alone air from your ass." Orn dropped his fishing pole, tackling Eric off the log onto the ground. As the boys wrestled, Orn was maintaining the upper hand, while Eric, who was significantly stronger, struggled because he was laughing so hard. In his anger, the younger boy said, "If Selty ever gets a sniff of your pants, she'll want to marry someone else." Eric's darkened as he fought his arm free and dug his fingers into Orn's armpit. The younger boy's face turned from anger to surprise, and then he succumbed to uncontrollable laughter as Eric turned the tide by tickling him. All right. Damn it. That's not fair. Dirty ass and dirty tricks," a sullen Orn said with a sour expression. "All right, truce. But no more comments about Selty." "It's off limits," said Eric, raising himself to his knees and helping his brother up. "Well, stop being dirty. I'm telling you, she won't put up with it." "Shut up." Orn, despite his annoyance, fought against a burgeoning smile. As they stood to collect themselves, Eric turned to his brother, his face turning serious, and said, "We'd better grab our poles before they get pulled in the water." Orn snorted and looked at Eric with a sly grin. A grin Eric returned as he realized his brother's train of thought. His grin then turned sarcastic, as his brow furrowed. "Ha ha ha. You know what I meant. Father will brain us both if we lose them." "Come on," Eric said. They dusted each other off, picked up their poles, and sat back down. Eric held his pole in the crook of his elbow, and reached into his satchel, producing a hunk of brown rye bread. He tore the bread, giving half to his Orn. The brothers went back to fishing, looking for the telltale ripples that would show a bite, while taking bites of their own from their bread. After both boys finished eating, Orn turned his face slightly toward his brother. "It's been hours, Eric. How much longer should we wait? I don't think there's any fish around here. We'll stay a little while longer and see what happens." I don't want to go back empty-handed. Orn let out a small sigh, shrugged, and said, Sure, a little longer. As Orn stared into the water, he saw below the surface a glowing silhouette. It appeared human-shaped and hovered below the surface. Orn nudged Eric, who looked at him, and asked, What? Orn, pointing to the patch of water, looked at his brother, and asked, What do you think that is? Ah, it looks like water, Eric said with a condescending smirk. Orn's eyes flitted back to the spot he pointed to, but what he saw had disappeared. Ha! I swear I saw something glowing. Probably just the sun reflecting. I don't know about that. It was beneath the surface. Why don't you dive in and get a closer look? Eric leaned in as if to grab Orn, who held up his hands and said, Hey, truce, remember? Eric laughed, turning his attention back to his line. Orn gazed into the water, thinking on what he'd seen. He had an eerie feeling it was watching him, though he couldn't recall seeing eyes, just a luminescent blob resembling a person. While he contemplated this, his attention drifted further out to sea. About 100 feet out, he saw seabirds circling. Occasionally, one would dive into the water and return to the surface with a fish in its beak. In the water near the birds swam a pod of worms, an aquatic draconid which could grow to 20 feet long, with bodies covered with pearl-like iridescent, green to turquoise scales. Intelligent creatures, they were more of a nuisance to sailors than a danger. On whims known only to themselves, they either helped or hindered a vessel's journey. Despite their fearsome appearance, they were herbivores, feeding on seaweed and kelp from the seabed. The pod soon disappeared below the surface, reappearing several moments later, hundreds of feet further out. Orn glanced sideways and saw that his brother's focus remained on the bark. Then, returning his gaze to where the seabirds were, an idea presented itself. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the water. He envisioned the water beneath the seabirds moving towards the shore. As his focus intensified, he felt pressure in his mind as he concentrated on the water flowing toward him. Seabirds on the surface leapt into flight, feeling something amiss beneath them. Orn felt a tickle on his upper lip and touched his fingers to it. When he examined his fingertips, he saw blood there. He wiped his nose with his hands and sniffed hard, trying to hide it from Eric. When he looked at his hand, the blood had smeared. He cast a glance at his brother. When he saw his brother still gazing at the piece of bark, he used the water in their fish pail to rinse his hand and face. Orn was so focused on cleaning the blood from his face that when Eric whooped with excitement, he almost fell off the log. This made him aware that he'd also hooked a fish. They wrestled as the fish fought to stay in the water. After several minutes of struggle, they each pulled in decent-sized perch, landed them, and placed them in the pail. The fish splashed around in the pail, but the boys didn't notice. They were focusing on baiting their hooks. The brothers cast their lines again, flashing each other broad smiles. They hooked 2 more each in quick succession, and both boys were breathing hard from the exertion. After agreeing they'd caught enough, the boys began packing up. Of the perch they'd caught, 5 were decent-sized, but the last one Eric caught was significantly larger than the rest. We should clean these before we head home, Orn. I mean, Mother will only make us do it anyhow. And if we do it here, our home won't stink of fish, said Eric. Good idea. Then it'll only stink of you. Arsehole, said Eric, pushing Orn with his elbow, a mock scowl on his face as both boys chuckled. You should take the big one over to Selty and her mother. Why would I do that? Come on, Eric, you can't be that thick-headed. It'll impress her. Plus, a man is supposed to provide food for his family. That's the impression you'll give. A man who can feed a family. All right, no need to be insulting. I could always improve your face with a fat lip. I reckon it'll look good on you. It might, but not as good as the one Father'll give you when he sees it. Eric glared at his brother, weighing the merits of risking his father's wrath, before deciding to let it go. He shifted his focus back to the fish, and said, Anyway, let's get these cleaned up. They gutted and cleaned the fish, however, the pail they'd brought wasn't big enough to hold them. Instead, they emptied the water out, and finding a thin 4-foot-long stick, threaded the fish through the gills to carry them home. They gathered up their gear, hoisted the stick onto their shoulders, and headed back to their village. It was an hour's walk inland from where the boys fished. They climbed up into the copse of trees, startling a grazing doe. The sudden burst of movement gave the boys a start. Eyes wide, they looked at each other, then laughed. Through the trees, they eventually found their way to the wide, well-worn path following along the fence line of a paddock. White sheep stood in large clumps throughout, with the occasional black face lifting and sniffing the air before returning to their grazing. Mythwich village had a population of nearly 120 people, and while most lived in the village proper, several lived on farms scattered about the village surrounds. A large shaggy white and grey dog popped out from among the sheep, bounding over to the fence line, tail wagging and barking at the boys. "Belky. Heya, boy," said Orn with enthusiasm. "Come on, Orn. We can't stop and play with him. We have to bring these back," Eric said, gesturing with his thumb behind him. Orn looked at his older brother with a pleading expression. "But look at him. He must be so bored, watching fluffy clouds poop and munch grass all day. Come back and see him later." Orn's face changed from pleading to petulant as he said, Sure. As if Mother will let that happen. She'll fill the rest of our day with tasks and chores." Eric chuckled, looking over his shoulder. "Actually, you're not wrong. Even so, we do need to get home." With a slight pang of regret, Orn looked back at Belky as he sat there, the wagging of his tail coming to a stop. "Sorry, boy. Maybe tomorrow." The brothers followed the path along the fence, passing by a thatch-roofed farmhouse. They saw Derek Hagan, a man in his 40s with graying brown hair and beard, working on his fence. "Quite the haul you lads have caught. Venna will be pleased. 1 fish for each Avdlak and Sogod." Derek chuckled as he pointed to the largest fish, and said, "That one's clearly Vilda's." The boys beamed in response, and Orn pointed to the fish and said, "Most likely Mother will make fish stew, so there'll be plenty if you want any." "No, I couldn't eat another woman's food, my boy. My wife would wear my guts for garters," said Derek, then he laughed some more. The boys waved and continued home, while Derek Hagan watched after them for a short time with a wistful smile, thinking of his own youth long since past. He shook off his nostalgia before chuckling and returning to his work. Once they were out of earshot, Orn turned to his brother and asked, "Eric, is his wife really that mean?" "No, I'm sure he was being polite and making a joke. His wife is very nice. Well, from what I've seen." The fence line fell away as they entered the village outskirts. Thatched wooden cottages stood scattered about as though they were dice tossed by a giant. The meandering path opened onto the well and community area near the village center. There, the centerpiece was a carved pole honoring the gods, was the village place of worship, celebration, and ceremony. The boys arrived at their home, a simple structure, much like the rest of the village, made of a single building with a sloped thatch roof and 2 chimneys. Smoke floated from the chimney at the rear of the house, announcing their mother was cooking. The 2 boys walked to the back of the house, and into the kitchen where their mother was preparing lunch. Venna was a striking woman. Her only flaw being a gap in her left brow, a memento from her shield maiden past. Nobody would suspect this woman to be a warrior of note, wearing a pale blue homespun dress with a white kitchen apron. She had her blonde hair tied back in a single braid, and her slate-colored eyes added twin splashes of contrast to her pale face. She was finishing making vegetable soup on the stove, getting ready to take it to the table for serving. "Mother," said Eric, "look what me and Orn brought home." Venna smiled and without turning said, "Orn and I." She then waited a second before chiding, "Don't roll your eyes at me, Eric." Eric looked at Orn with an incredulous expression on his face that said without words, "How does she always know?" Orn responded to him with an equally puzzled look as he shrugged his shoulders. Venna turned, carrying the large pot of soup to the table. After placing the pot down, she regarded her boys and inspected their morning's work. She said, "Lovely. And I see you remembered to clean them this time. All right, place them over there on the bench. Watching as her sons walked to the bench, they were about to dump everything on top before she sighed, then said, "No. Take them off the stick first, then toss the stick in the fire." "Don't roll your eyes, Mother," Eric said sarcastically as Orn buried his face in his elbow to stifle his laugh. This comment earned him a slap to the back of his head from Venna, who, although delivering it in admonishment, couldn't hold back her own chuckle as she shook her head. "Once you've taken care of that, Orn, can you set the table and then head out to the forge to tell your father lunch is ready? Eric, you can take that large fish to the Sogard's place." Orn groaned and complained, "But Mother, we worked hard this morning." "Can't we go?" Venna cut him off with, "And while I appreciate your efforts, now you must appreciate mine. Unless you want to eat hot soup with your hands, get the bowls, spoons, breadboard, and knife onto the table, and then go get your father." Orn's shoulders sank in defeat, and his face wore a comical expression of fake despair. This made Venna's eyes twinkle with amusement as she grabbed Orn's cheeks, leaned forward, and kissed his forehead. She then spun him by the shoulders toward the dish cabinet and tapped his backside as he trudged disconsolately towards it. Eric, blushing furiously, almost dropped the fish as he fumbled. Venna noticed her older son's discomfort and smiled. Approaching his side, she gently grasped his shoulders and said to him, "Eric, relax. Take some deep breaths." Eric did as she told him. "Better?" she asked. Eric nodded, though a sickly frown still clouded his face. Venna looked at her son and said, "I know you like Celty, but there's no need to worry. All you need to be is you, because if you try to be something else, then you'll never know if Celty likes you or this other thing. Besides, chances are she isn't even home. Now, pick it up. Off you go." Venna smiled, and ruffled Eric's hair as he picked up the fish. He made his way out of the kitchen, along the side of their home, and across the path diagonally towards the Sogard's cottage. Orn had set the table and went out to their father's forge. As he approached, he could see smoke from the center of the roof. The structure was an open-sided wooden roof on posts. At its center were a large furnace, 3 different-sized anvils, and a quenching tub. Off to the side were neat shelves and racks containing various tools and molds. From the moment he stepped out of the cottage, Orn could hear the ringing of a hammer on steel. He saw a flash of movement near the front of the house, and considered investigating it. However, he dismissed it as most likely Eric rehearsing what he would say to Celty. Orn chuckled to himself at that thought and continued to the forge. Orn entered the side of the structure, where his father worked. Vilda was a giant man with a barrel chest and thick, trunk-like legs. He was a head taller than most other haldermen, who were on average, a rather tall people to begin with. He had blue eyes, long black hair with braids at the temples, and in his graying beard. As Orn entered, Vilda used tongs to dunk the red-hot metal he was hammering into the quenching tub. The piece made a loud hissing noise as it hit the water, with steam billowing up from it. The forge was hot inside, and Orn was already beginning to perspire. His father looked up, and a broad smile creased his face. He went back to finish what he was doing, then looked back to Orn as he said, "Well, son, how was it?" Orn looked confused for a moment, and then realized his father meant fishing. He replied, "Oh, good actually. We caught 3 each. Eric caught one that was almost double the size of the rest." "Huh," said Vilda with raised eyebrows. Orn said with a sly grin, "He took that one to Celty's home for a wedding present." Vilda's laugh filled the forge, a booming laugh as big as the man himself. "Our son you tease now, but your day will come." "No way. That'll never happen," Orn retorted just a little too quickly, and a little too forcefully. "Oh right, Mother told me to get you for lunch." "That time already." "All right, let me quickly finish up, and I'll be right in." Orn smiled and headed back to the cottage. On the other side of the main path, Eric approached the Sogard cottage and called out with a slight croak in his voice. "Hello?" A woman's voice responded. "Just a moment." Eric waited just outside the front door, holding the fish, and breathing slowly, as his mother had told him. After about a minute or two, the woman appeared. Mrs. Brenda Sogard wore a plain blue cotton dress with a half apron around her waist. Although not slim, she was an attractive woman. She kept her wavy auburn hair tied back in a simple ponytail. A light dusting of freckles covered her fair skin, with hazel green eyes under thin, arched brows, and high cheekbones in an apple-shaped face. "What have we here?" she asked as she wiped her hands on her apron, regarding the nervous boy standing before her. Celty, a slender girl of 15, stepped out from behind her. The girl's resemblance to her mother was obvious. However, Celty was a slender, waif-like creature. She had large green eyes and long auburn hair arranged in twin, thick, shoulder-length braids that ran down behind her ears. Mrs. Sogard, hello. Me and, Orn and I went fishing this morning, and I thought you might. Eric's voice trailed off as he noticed Celty smiling at him. Brenda, pursing her lips to control her smirk, demanded, "Well, what is it, child? Out with it." Eric had no clue what to say or do. Instead, he thrust the fish forward with a pleading expression. Brenda regarded him, and whilst impressed by the fish and by the gesture, merely stated, "Not bad. Will you bring it to the kitchen for me, please?" Inclining her head, she turned and led the way back inside her cottage. Once Eric was behind her, Brenda dropped the facade, grinning broadly. She knew he liked her Celty, and secretly hoped for a union between their families, but she needed to maintain appearances. After all, Sogard ladies are not loose women. The lad would have to work for it. She lived alone with Celty. Her husband had taken ill late last year and perished soon after. Celty's two older brothers, Sorgi and Sven, were both at sea, giving their service to the crown. The two families had grown closer since her husband passed, with Venna often helping her, or sending Vilda and the boys over to assist her as needed. Behind Brenda, Celty walked alongside Eric, bumping shoulders and staring at him, secretly reveling in his discomfort. She was nervous around him too, only she was better at hiding it. Not to mention teasing him made her feelings easier to hide, while getting revenge for all the times he had played pranks on her. In the kitchen, Brenda gestured for Eric to place the fish on the bench. He did that, then dipped his hands in the water bucket to wash them. Brenda saw him and grabbed a bar of soap from the windowsill, handing it to him. "This should help with the smell." "Thank you, ma'am." Eric finished washing his hands and looked around for a cloth to dry them. Celty, holding a towel, approached him from behind. She poked him in the back, and he turned to face her. She didn't make eye contact, instead focusing on drying his hands. Her flowery scent filled Eric's nose, making his heart beat faster and making him feel lightheaded. "They're all done," said Celty softly. Eric, finally finding his voice, said, "Thanks. I'd better get going. My mother is expecting me for lunch." By way of farewell, Brenda said, "All right, Eric. Give my love to your family." Eric smiled and nodded before leaving. He dawdled his way home, lost in thought, dreaming up ways he could broach the topic of making formal overtures regarding his intentions. He knew soon he would be required to give his service to the crown. So if he truly wanted Celty's hand, he'd have to do something about it soon, though he was unsure how to proceed. Did he ask her brothers? They were off doing their service. Should he ask Mrs. Sogard? What would she say? The dilemma looped through his mind, causing him increasing agitation. Before he knew it, he was already home. Upon entering the cottage, he saw everyone seated at the dining table, not yet eating. Venna wore a mischievous smile as she regarded her son. "I was getting ready to send Orn out to look for you. I started thinking when you laid eyes on Celty, you had forgotten who you were and where you lived." Eric's cheeks flushed as he voiced his protests and denials. Vilda chuckled as he said, "Don't be so embarrassed, son. We live in a small village, everyone knows. Besides, you've got to strike while the iron's hot." He grinned and winked at Eric, impressed with himself for his blacksmithing pun. "Father, please. said Eric with a helpless expression. Venna chimed in, saying, "Don't fret, Eric. We have the festival soon. I'll speak to Brenda, and we'll arrange it all for you. You need only concern yourself with showing up to dance with her." Then, she popped a small piece of bread into her mouth. Eric's face was a mixture of mortified embarrassment, excitement, relief, and genuine gratitude for his mother. He sat down next to Orn, giving him the side-eye, warning him not to start. Orn's eyebrows raised as his face became a picture of innocence, belied by the mirthful twitching of the corners of his mouth. The table fell silent for a few seconds. Then, Vilda's face split into a sly smile, as he looked straight at Eric while he lowered his usually booming voice. "Did she like her wedding gift?" Orn snorted. Venna covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Eric looked down, his face crestfallen. His mother finally stopped herself from laughing and turned her gaze towards Eric. "Nah, come on, son. Don't be upset. We're only teasing. Really, I think it's wonderful." The family sat and ate together, laughing and talking, as was their usual mealtime routine. Before long, they had finished eating, and Vilda clapped Eric on the back. "Forge awaits, lad," said Vilda. The two headed out, leaving Orn to help Venna clear the table. They stacked the plates in comfortable silence until Venna noticed Orn had stopped bringing dishes over. Instead, he fidgeted with a spoon while staring into space. Venna paused, ever in tune with her family's feelings, dried her hands, and asked, "What's troubling you, son?" Orn snapped out of his daze, then said in a quiet voice, "It happened again." "Oh. What did you do?" Orn thought for a few moments before he spoke. "Well, I just really wanted us to catch something so our time wasn't wasted, so I thought about the current, and sort of thought it would be nice if it would change directions a little bit." "Why are you laughing at me, mother?" "I'm being serious." Venna, struggling to stifle her laughter, said, "I'm sorry, sweetie, I know. It's just the way you described it. It's as though you asked the water politely, 'Can you please bring the fish over?'" As his mother laughed, Orn was trying to keep his scowl in place but gave in, and soon they were laughing together. After a few moments, he wiped his eyes. "Since you put it that way, it sounds kind of dumb, I guess." She placed a hand over her mouth as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Orn, a little taken aback by his mother's rare display of anguish, felt a lump in his throat as tears came unbidden to his own eyes. He lurched forward, wrapping his mother in a tight embrace. After Orn had almost burned down his father's forge while helping Vilda and Eric, Venna coaxed out of him that he had potential as an elemental who could manipulate fire. From that day, Venna instructed Orn to avoid fire when possible. With the incident at the forge, and now this, Venna had begun to suspect Orn was very rare and powerful. She feared this deeply from her own terrible childhood experience, and believed that if she could keep him from using these abilities, she could protect him. 1,000 or so elementals emerged in a generation, the majority of whom received a blessing from the god Everin with the ability to heal and illuminate the darkness. Most of those became priests. The rest were blessed by Everin's offspring, Mayim, Durin, or Briga with fire, air, and water respectively. Rarest were those with multiple blessings. After a while Orn said, "It's all right, mother. We still have 2 years. And if I'm as strong as you say, I will come see you often. Who will stop me?" He pulled back to ensure Venna could see his smile. She smiled back and hugged him tight again. Then she untangled herself from the embrace and swiped the tears from her cheeks. "All right, son. Let's get this place tidied up and get in some sword and shield practice before I have to get started on dinner. We can't let these lovely perch go to waste." Once they had set up the area of the yard, she began, as was usual, with drills. "All right, son, stand at the ready." Orn did as instructed. She yanked his shield and pushed him to check his grip and balance. Then she checked his grip on the wooden practice sword. Satisfied, Venna said, "Good. Let's begin. We'll start at half speed." The sound of wood clacking, punctuated by the occasional thump of shield strikes, resounded throughout the yard. Back and forth, they lunged, dodged, and circled. Over his mother's shoulder, Orn saw what he thought was a blonde girl with flowers in her hair, peeking out from behind a tree. His loss of focus caused a slight drop in his guard, and Venna's wooden sword tapped him on the head. Pay attention, Orn. When you're in the fight, you can't lose your concentration. But I saw someone over there, behind that tree. Venna looked over her shoulder to where Orn pointed, but nobody was there. Seriously, Orn. Even if someone was there, never drop your guard, alright? It's important. It can cost you your life. Now again. Chapter 2. Mid-morning to the south, far out in the Socializing Strait, the sound of wood creaking matched slow rolling waves as they passed under the Nevan slaver ship. This provided an ambient background to the usual sounds far out to sea. The gulls squawked as they circled astern, creating a harsh counternote to the soothing sounds of the ship's passage through the gentle waves. Diving sporadically, the gulls picked out what food they could from the refuse trailing the ship. The ship, a mid-sized Nevan galley, had a crew of 30 fighting men, and from the bow protruded a bronze ram. This attachment punched into the hulls of merchant ships unlucky enough to be caught unescorted. Just behind this, attached to the keel, was a clicker, a device that worked like a miniature water wheel, making a constant clicking noise underwater to keep sea creatures away, preventing them from damaging the ship. On the prow above the ram was a painted pair of eyes over a gaping, sharp-toothed mouth. The ship itself had a wide beam with a single mast halfway between the bow and midship. Attached to the mast and crosspiece was a large black cloth sail billowing in the wind. The sail on a Nevan galley was only useful for tailwinds blowing in a 45-degree arc on each side of the center line, otherwise known as a quartering wind. Wind from any direction outside this arc would require furled sails and deployed oars. Such were the limitations of ship designs in the Nevan Empire. After Gracchus gave the order to ship oars, the galley slaves pulled the oars into the vessel, making the most of the respite. Although there was only a mild wind, it blew in the direction Gracchus wanted. He believed this a good omen. If nothing went wrong, the rewards would vastly exceed what he could earn during any 2-year period. But the risk of capture by the Holder barbarians constantly haunted his thoughts. Nevans were a tough and disciplined people. Their battle tactics had won them a vast and mighty empire. One could forgive the average Nevan a certain level of arrogance, considering these things. Unlike those average people, Gracchus understood the danger of overconfidence, as he had witnessed firsthand the humiliation that kind of hubris could bring. Gracchus paced the deck, checking to make sure the galley slaves kept their place. A callous man, he was a product of the mean streets in the city's slums, scrounging and thieving to scrape by. At 13, authorities had caught him pickpocketing, and the sentencing praetor presented him with the choice of either losing his right hand to the chopping block or using it to wield a sword for the empire. He was further hardened by his experiences during the 10 years he'd served in the imperial legions. He did not feel for the people he and his crew captured and sold. They were merely livestock, nothing more, nothing less. To keep them in line, he would not hesitate to slit a throat, be it a resistive slave, or a crew member for sullying a virgin, a warning to the other crew to not devalue his merchandise. His sparing captives from the whip was not an act of compassion. It was a calculated decision to avoid damaging his captives. A slave's value decreased if they had marks or scars. 4 male slaves, it showed potential buyers a disobedient slave. 4 women and children, well, the reasons for that were obvious. The whip he used for motivating his galley slaves when he needed more speed out of them. Gracchus glanced about, occasionally tugging ropes here, checking some rigging there, and threw a last glance towards where the Nevan shore lay beyond the southern horizon. He called out, "Vanna!" The compact, muscular bald man came over to Gracchus and snapped to attention. In his salt-seared gravelly voice, he asked, "Yes, Captain. Let's go below and inspect our friend's cargo." "Aye, sir." Both men disappeared down the hatch leading to the hold near the ship's keel. Lining both sides of the hold were barrels. Gracchus grabbed the lantern hanging next to the hatch frame, passing it to Vanna. "Hold the lantern for me so I can see what I'm doing." "Sure thing, sir." Gracchus spied what he sought, a barrel marked with a red circle, and bashed in the lid. He moved the broken wood out of the way and drew in a sharp hissing breath. "Oh, bugger me," he said in a strained, hushed tone. "Sir. That shit. That utter shit. What in the bleeding blue blazes game is he playing?" "What is it, sir?" "Look inside, Van. Tell me what you see." Vanna held the lantern aloft, as he maneuvered into a position where he could see into the barrel. "Oh, Festus britches. Are those?" "Yes, they are." Gracchus pressed the back of his hand against Vanna's chest, forcing him to move aside, and then shuffled some items around in the barrel, until he found what he sought, a tightly bound scroll, which read, "Salutations, Captain. I take it that as you are reading this, you are well underway. And no doubt you have seen that this barrel contains uniforms and weapons of our glorious legions. Unfortunately, I couldn't include shields, as they don't fit in barrels, and are therefore not so discreet. However, the tunics, helmets and breastplates should be sufficient for our purpose. Any of your fighting men who will put ashore for this venture, I require they don these uniforms. I need witnesses to see them, and of course, should the unfortunate happen, that some of your men die, all the better. I am sure I needn't tell you it is imperative that none of your men left behind remain alive. They must avoid capture at all costs. Once you have selected your target, taken any captives you can, and are on your return voyage, I will need you to sink all uniforms to the bottom of the sea. I shall toast to your success in this undertaking, and upon return, you shall be all the richer." The letter was unsigned. Gracchus chuckled, thinking to himself, "He's a crafty bastard. Didn't even sign it in case I don't burn it." Turning to his first mate, he said, "Count how many uniforms, and then round up that many of our most capable fighting men, plus 5 more. Tell them to muster outside the hatch after supper. That's when we'll let them know the plan and their tasks." "Maybe we should forget this and just leave," Vanner said. "We can wait it out along the southeast coast." "We shouldn't go through with this, sir." Gracchus gave Vanner a hard look and said in a tone that would brook no argument, "You will do as you are told, clear?" Vanner lowered his eyes. "Aye, sir, I'll take care of her." With that, Gracchus returned to the main deck and headed aft to his cabin, the scroll scrunched in his meaty left hand. As he made his way there, some of his crew stood to, touching clenched right fists to their left shoulders in the traditional Nevan salute as they greeted him. He nodded to them in reply as he rushed aft. Yes, it was a slaver vessel, but Gracchus ran a disciplined ship, crewed by many who'd served with and under him in the legions. Shortly he arrived at his cabin door and cast a last glance around before stepping inside, pulling the door shut behind him. Once inside, he tilted his head back, eyes closed, and took a deep, steadying breath as he clutched the scroll to his chest. A mixture of anger and apprehension swirled in his mind as he tried to steady himself. 400 gold, Gracchus repeated over in his mind, serving as a mantra to steel his resolve. His cabin, although it was for the captain, was not overly spacious. It had enough room for a couple of chairs and a small, square table at its center for meals and viewing sea charts. There was a narrow cot in the corner for him to sleep on, and a cabinet with some personal items stowed within. He muttered a few choice curse words toward his mysterious benefactor, and then walked over to his cabinet to grab a wine vase and a cup. After filling his cup, he downed it in one go and poured himself another. Turning to his cabin lantern, Gracchus opened the cover. With a shaking hand, he held the scroll to the flame. Being careful not to burn himself, he tilted the parchment to ensure it caught nicely, and then returned to his table, dropping it on the metal dinner plate at its center. He sat down, eyeing the burning parchment as he continued drinking from his cup. Gracchus was not a coward, by any stretch. However, he had a very reasonable fear of holder ships. He had seen firsthand what happens to an armed vessel that takes hostile actions in their waters. Fortunately, he'd been at the rear of the last invasion fleet the Nevan Empire sent to expand the empire into holder lands. He shuddered inwardly at the memory of those poor souls who were not as fortunate as he. He rose once more to fill his wine cup, then sat back down, staring at the ashes. One sip, then another, his mind drifting into memories. It was 23 years ago when he was still a sergeant in the Nevan Imperial Legion. The fleet he was with deployed as an advanced party of 30 ships to establish a beachhead on the nearest Holvalan coast, near the town of Penbok. The going was good, the seas were choppy, but not overly rough, with skies cloudy, but not threatening. The slave driver occasionally cracked the whip, and screamed, "Pull! Pull, you whore sons! The drum beats for a reason, so pull!" After leaving the docks, the ships had made good time. The wind was blowing an easterly breeze, so the ships were under oars, but at least it wasn't a headwind. However, they'd only made it halfway across the Nevan Gulf when the lookout cried, "Sail H.O." "Where away?" replied the first mate. "Off the starboard bow." All eyes looked forward and to the right over the water. In the distance, sure enough, were 6 vertically striped sails of red and white on the horizon, holder ships, bearing down on them. "Captain, shall we intercept?" asked the first mate. "No. Look, 20 have already headed over to deal with them. We press ahead." As Gracchus was a mere legionary sergeant, on the sea, he was a spectator unless directly boarding or repelling in ship-to-ship engagements. But what he watched would chill him to the bone and scar him for life. He watched first in disbelief, then amazement, and finally horror as those sails increased in size at an inconceivable rate. No ship should be able to move that fast. Then, to his ever-increasing terror, those holder ships, 6 holder ships began wheeling around the Nevan galleys as though they were standing still. They pulled alongside them, and before long, flames were licking hungrily at the sky. Then those holder devils would move on to the next. The captain was watching, his haunted expression mirroring Gracchus' own. Then the captain whispered urgently to his first mate, before dashing into his cabin and slamming the door. The first mate screamed, "Every ship for themselves. Hoist the sail and come about." Within the space of 2 hours, the Nevan fleet of 30 ships had lost 2/3 of its number. The sight of the bulk of their small fleet afire, and 3 more holder sails on the eastern horizon was enough to break the Nevan spirits and send them scurrying home. Of the 20 ships sent against the Holdermen, only 1 returned to the Nevan Empire. Its crew had become dragons, a holder practice reserved for the worst of criminals and invaders. But for the Nevan crew and legionaries on that one particular ship, those savages took it a step further. The Holdermen towed the ship to the vicinity of Pakwaraneva, the Nevan capital, then pushed it toward the city. It was a vision of nightmares. A Nevan galley propelled by a mainsail made of its crew and legionaries, some of whom were still alive, their flayed-back skins stitched together into large, writhing cloth. Their shrill cries of agony from the wind blowing onto exposed, bloody nerves echoed throughout the city, causing riots of panicked citizens who believed the hells had opened. Because of this gruesome display, the Nevan Empire had no choice but to enter into guileless, formal diplomatic relations with the holder nations. The story of that crew circulated widely, ensuring that, should the Nevan Empire talk about invading holder lands again, their entire military would revolt. The rest of the ships and crews had disappeared without a trace. Gracchus presumed they were burnt hulks, cum tombs, lying on the bottom of the sea. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and/or comment. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next installment.